The wind howled across the empty desert, carrying with it fine yellow dust that stung the skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Ethan Cole had lived here for years, far from cities and far from people, in a small, broken mining outpost on the edge of the wasteland. He liked the silence, the peace, the feeling that no one would bother him here. But that night, the silence was broken. It started as a faint sound, almost lost in the storm. At first, Ethan thought it was the wind, whistling through the cracks in the old metal walls. But then he heard it again, a soft, weak cry. It was not the sound of any desert animal he knew. It sounded human, but not quite. He pulled on his old dust coat, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped outside into the storm. The sand hit his face hard, making it hard to see. He listened carefully. Letting the wind guide him, the cry came again, this time from the direction of the broken rock fields. As he got closer, his boots crunched over shattered stone, and his light cut through the darkness. That's when he saw her. Lying half buried in the sand was a figure, small and fragile. Her skin was a pale blue, glowing faintly even in the storm. Strands of silver hair stuck to her face, her lips trembling, as if she was fighting to breathe. Ethan froze. His first thought was danger. He had heard of alien patrols hunting fugitives in these parts. If she was one of them, he could be in trouble just for looking at her. But then he saw her chest rise and fall weakly, and something in him pushed the fear aside. He knelt beside her, brushing the sand from her face. Her eyes opened slightly large, bright, and not like any human's, and she whispered something in a language he didn't understand. The sound was soft, like a song. Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still. Ethan's hands moved fast, checking her pulse. It was faint. Her skin was cold. Too cold, worse. There was blood, dark and glowing faintly, seeping from a wound in her side. If he left her here, she would be dead in minutes. He looked around. The storm hid them for now, but it also made it harder to get back. He slid his arms under her, surprised at how light she felt. As he lifted her, he noticed strange marks on her skin, lines and shapes that pulsed with a dim light. He had never seen anything like it. The wind screamed louder as he struggled back to the outpost. Every step felt heavier. Sand filled his boots, stung his eyes, and bit into his skin. Finally, he reached the rusted metal door. He kicked it open and stepped inside, slamming it shut behind him. He laid her on his workbench, sweeping tools aside. The glow from her skin lit the room faintly. He grabbed an old medkit and did his best to clean the wound. But the blood was like nothing he had seen before. It shimmered, almost alive, and the wound seemed to resist the sealant. Outside, a low humming sound cut through the wind. Ethan froze. It wasn't the storm, it was mechanical. He moved to the window and peeked out in the distance, through the blowing sand. Small black shapes moved, hovering low to the ground. Drones. Scanning for something or someone, he looked back at the alien girl. She lay still, breathing in shallow gasps. Whatever trouble she was in had just found its way to him for a moment. Ethan considered leaving her outside, pretending he never saw her. It would be safer, but as he looked at her pale, fragile face, he knew he couldn't. He had lived alone for so long that he thought nothing could change him. But something in those brief moments, the cry in the storm, the glow in her eyes had already changed everything. He covered her with a thermal blanket and dimmed the lights. The hum outside grew louder. The drones were closer now, beams of light cutting through the sand. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. He moved quietly to grab his old mining tool, a heavy iron rod with a sharp edge. The door rattled slightly as the wind pushed against it. Or maybe something else did. Ethan tightened his grip on the rod. Breathing slowly, the storm roared. The drones wind, and somewhere under that blanket, the alien girl's faint glow pulsed like a heartbeat. He didn't know who she was, why she was here, or what hunted her. But he did know one thing: if they came for her tonight, they would have to go through him first. The storm outside kept screaming. But Ethan's focus was on the girl lying on his workbench. Her breathing was uneven, her chest rising and falling. Too slowly, he worked fast, cleaning the wound with what little antiseptic he had left. The shimmering blood made his hands feel unsteady. It looked like liquid light and smelled faintly metallic, nothing like human blood. She made a soft sound, a pained whisper, but her eyes didn't open. Ethan knew she was fading. He wrapped her side with strips of clean cloth, but the bleeding didn't stop completely. He needed more supplies, more than his old med kit could give. And that meant going outside, which was the last thing he wanted with the drone still hovering. Nearby, he glanced at the small screen on his wall that connected to his old sensor array. The motion detectors showed movement 3 signals, slow but steady. The drones weren't just passing by. They were searching, and they were closing in. His gut tightened. He turned back to the girl. She was shaking now, her skin cold to the touch. He thought of lighting the heater, but stopped. Too much heat would show up on their scans instead. He wrapped another blanket around her and pulled her closer to the small power core, just enough to give her warmth without drawing attention. The humming outside grew louder, a low mechanical thrum that vibrated through the metal walls. Ethan's hands itched to grab his rifle, but it had been broken for months. Instead, he reached for his mining rod again. The heavy iron bar, feeling almost comforting in his grip. A soft, wet cough broke his thoughts. He looked down at her, and for the first time her eyes were open, glowing faintly like molten silver. She tried to speak, but the words came in short bursts, her voice fragile. Ethan shook his head. "Save your strength," he said quietly, not even sure if she understood. But she insisted, forming a single word: "Run." Her gaze flicked to the door, and her expression tightened with fear. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. Whoever was after her wasn't far, and if she wanted him to run, it meant they wouldn't hesitate to kill him too. The door made a metallic groan. Ethan's breath caught. He moved to the side, pressing against the wall, gripping the rod tightly. Then a sharp clang rang out as something hit the outside of the door. Not once, but twice, a testing strike, like they were checking its strength. He glanced at her again. Her hands twitched weakly under the blanket, fingers curling as if trying to hold on to something. He knew he didn't have long. If they broke in, he would have to fight in close quarters. And with her in this state, they would take her in seconds. The third strike came, harder, the old hinges squealing. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He didn't have time to think. He dashed to the corner where he kept his emergency kit and pulled out a small smoke grenade, something he had taken from a crashed patrol years ago. It was risky, but if it worked, it could buy them a few seconds. He moved back to her and whispered, "Hold on," then slung her over his shoulder as gently as he could. She was lighter than she looked, and her cold skin sent a shiver down his spine. The door screeched again, this time bending slightly. A sharp beam of light cut through the gap, scanning the room. Ethan pulled the pin and tossed the smoke grenade toward the door. A hiss filled the air as thick gray clouds began to spread. The door slammed open, figures stepping in, shapes in dark armor with glowing visors, but the smoke swallowed them. Blinding their view, he slipped out the back maintenance hatch. Boots crunching over sand and gravel, the storm helped hide his movements. Wind and dust whipping at his coat. Behind him, muffled voices shouted through the smoke. The humming of the drones rose sharply as they tried to adjust. He kept moving, holding her close. Her faint glow was the only light in the darkness around them. He didn't know where he was going yet, just away from the outpost, away from the danger. The storm howled louder, and the ground sloped downward toward the old rock channels. Natural paths carved by long dried rivers. Her head rested against his shoulder. and he felt her breathing falter again. Panic flickered in his chest. If she died now, all of this would be for nothing. He pushed himself harder, legs aching, heart hammering. The shouts behind him grew fainter, but the buzzing sound of one drone was still close. He spotted a narrow gap between two jagged rock walls, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. He slipped inside, pressing his back against the cold. Stone, the drone passed overhead, its light scanning the ground but missing his position. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe. He looked down at her again. Her eyes fluttered open just enough for her to whisper another word. One he didn't understand. It was alien, sharp yet soft, and then she went still again. He didn't know what it meant, but it carried weight, almost like a warning. Ethan tightened his grip on her and stared out into the storm. Knowing this was only the beginning, the hunt was on, and now he was part of it, whether he liked it or not. The narrow rock passage shielded them from the worst of the storm, but Ethan knew they couldn't stay there long. The girl's breathing was still too weak, and every second they stopped meant the hunters were getting closer. He adjusted his hold on her and started moving deeper into the winding channel, letting the sharp bends hide them from the sky. The ground here was uneven, littered with broken stones and old bones from creatures long gone. His boots slipped once, sending a loose rock clattering down the slope. He froze, listening somewhere. Behind them, faint mechanical beeps echoed off the stone walls. The drones had found his trail again. He quickened his pace, ducking under low arches of rock. The girl stirred slightly in his arms. Her eyelids trembling, he leaned down and spoke softly. "You're all right. I've got you." He didn't know if she could understand his words, but something in her breathing calmed for a moment. They came to a wider space where the canyon split into two paths. Ethan hesitated. His instincts told him to take the left path, which seemed narrower and harder to navigate. The right path looked easier, but left them exposed. He chose the left, forcing himself through the tight stone walls. The cold air inside seemed to grow sharper, and he noticed faint lights flickering along the ground ahead. At first, he thought they were reflections from his flashlight, but then he realized they were coming from the stone itself. Thin, glowing veins, like frozen lightning trapped beneath the surface. The girl's weak glow seemed to react, her skin pulsing faintly in time with the stone's light. Her fingers twitched against his arm, and she murmured a word again. He couldn't make sense of it, but the way her voice shook made him think it wasn't a random sound. He wanted to ask her more, but a sudden noise from behind killed the thought. Metal scraping against stone, followed by the sharp worry of engines. Ethan pressed himself against the wall, his breath silent. A small black drone floated into view at the far end of the passage, its single red eye glowing in the dim light. It paused, scanning, then started moving toward them. He cursed under his breath, shifting his grip on the girl. He couldn't fight with her in his arms, and he couldn't outrun it in this narrow space. His eyes darted around for anything he could use. His flashlight beam caught the edge of a loose slab above, wedged between two rocks. If he hit it right, it might fall. He stepped quietly to the side, setting the girl down gently against the wall. Her breathing quickened as if she knew what he was about to do. The drone's red light grew brighter, its mechanical hum loud in the confined space. Ethan gripped his mining rod and swung hard at the slab's edge. The rock shifted, groaned, then broke loose. Crashing down into the passage, the impact sent dust and shards flying, smashing the drone to pieces in a burst of sparks. Ethan didn't wait to see if it worked. He grabbed her again and pushed forward, deeper into the twisting channel. The light from the glowing veins grew stronger, reflecting off the stone and painting their faces in pale blue. It was almost beautiful, but the sound of more engines in the distance reminded him they were still being hunted. After what felt like an endless climb, They emerged into a small cavern. Water dripped slowly from the ceiling into a shallow pool. The air here was damp and heavy. He set her down beside the water and cupped some in his hands. Bringing it to her lips, she drank weakly, her throat moving as she swallowed for a moment. Their eyes met. Her gaze was tired but sharp. She reached out and touched his chest lightly, speaking again in her language. This time she said 2 words. Slow and deliberate. Ethan shook his head. I don't understand. She seemed frustrated, but too weak to try again. A faint rumble rolled through the stone under their feet. Ethan tensed. The sound wasn't from the storm. It was deeper, heavier, mechanical. He knew that meant one thing: their hunters were sending in something bigger. Not just drones, but ground troops. He checked the cavern for another way out. There was a narrow crack in the far wall, barely wide enough for a person. It might lead somewhere, but it was a risk. Staying here wasn't an option. He lifted her once more, feeling the strain in his arms, and moved toward the crack behind them. Faint red light began to flicker at the entrance of the passage. Shadows moved on the walls, the shapes of armored figures carrying weapons. Ethan's heart raced. He squeezed. Through the crack, the stones scraping his coat, the girl pressed her face against his shoulder as he forced his way through. On the other side, the ground opened into a steep slope leading downward into darkness. He had no choice but to descend, half sliding, half running. He made his way down until the faint glow of the stone disappeared entirely, leaving them in blackness. He stopped only when he could hear nothing but their breathing and the slow drip of unseen water. He stood still in the dark, knowing the hunters were still out there, somewhere above, searching, and that this chase was far from over. The darkness was complete, the kind that pressed against the eyes and made every sound sharper. Ethan stood still, letting his breathing slow, listening for any sign of movement from above. The alien girl's head rested against his shoulder, her breath soft but still. Too shallow, he needed to move. But one wrong step here could send them both falling into something far worse than the hunters. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small glow stick, snapping it with a sharp crack. A faint green light spread just enough to show the uneven ground ahead. The slope had led them into what looked like an old tunnel. Carved long ago, the walls were rough but marked with strange symbols. Worn down by time, Ethan's boots crunched softly over the stone floor as he moved forward. His mind kept flicking back to the hunters above. They were armed, organized, and relentless. If they had followed him this far into the wasteland, they wouldn't stop until they had her. The girl stirred slightly, her fingers gripping the edge of his coat. He looked down and saw her eyes open again, their soft, silver glow. Reflecting the light from the stick, she tried to speak, but her voice cracked. He shook his head gently. "Save your strength," he whispered. She frowned faintly, as if she didn't like being told that, then closed her eyes again. The tunnel twisted sharply, and Ethan slowed. The light revealed broken pieces of machinery, scattered across the floor, rusted and covered in dust. He recognized some of the design's old mining drones from before the outpost shut down, but these were bigger, heavier, and not human-made. The shapes were wrong, the edges too smooth, almost organic. A faint hum began to echo through the tunnel. Ethan froze. It wasn't the wind or the hunters. It was coming from deeper inside. Steady and mechanical, he stepped carefully. Over the debris, the sound growing louder with each step. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber, and his breath caught. In the center stood a massive machine, its surface covered in the same glowing lines as the rocks outside. Its design was alien, tall and narrow, with thin arms extending outward like insect legs. A soft, pulsing light glowed from its core, casting strange shadows across the chamber. Walls, the girl stirred again, her eyes opening wide this time. She looked at the machine and whispered something with urgency. Her voice was weak but insistent. Ethan didn't understand the words. But the way her hand reached toward it told him enough. She needed it. Maybe to heal, maybe for something else. He stepped closer, unsure if the thing was even functional. The machine gave a faint chime and a narrow beam of light swept over them. Scanning from head to toe, Ethan tensed, gripping his rod. But instead of attacking, the machine shifted, one of its thin arms lowering toward the girl. Her glow brightened faintly as the arm extended a small, curved plate toward her chest. Ethan hesitated, unsure if this was help or danger. But the girl's hand moved weakly toward it. The plate touched her skin, and a rush of light surged through. Her body, she gasped sharply, her back arching. Then her breathing steadied, deeper than before. For a moment, Ethan felt relief, but it didn't last. A sudden roar of engines filled the chamber, red light spilling into the tunnel behind them. The hunters had found a way down. Their armored shapes appeared in the entrance, weapons raised. Ethan yanked the plate from the machine, scooping the girl into his arms again. The alien device gave a protesting hum, but he didn't have time to care. The first blast of energy from the hunters hit the ground beside him, sending shards of rock into the air. He ran, his boots pounding over the stone as more shots lit up the darkness. He ducked behind a pillar of stone. The girl pressed close to his chest. Another blast hit the wall, the heat washing over his face. He swung his mining rod in a wide arc, knocking one of the hunter's weapons aside as they closed in. The impact rang out loud in the chamber. One of them lunged, their armor shining with the red glow of their visors. Ethan slammed the rod into the side of their helmet, sending them staggering back. Another tried to flank him, but the girl suddenly raised her hand weakly, a thin line of silver light shooting from her fingertips and striking the hunter's chest. The energy sent the armored figure crashing into the wall, smoke rising from the impact. She collapsed again right after, her strength spent. Ethan grabbed her tighter and broke into a sprint toward the far side of the chamber, a narrow tunnel. Waited there, half hidden by fallen rocks, he shoved through the debris. Scraping his arms and legs, the hunters shouted behind him, their footsteps clanging on the stone. The tunnel tilted upward, and faint daylight shone ahead. He pushed harder, lungs burning, legs aching. The girl's weight felt heavier now, but he didn't slow. Not until they burst out into the cold air of the wasteland again, the storm still raging, but now their only cover. He didn't stop running until the wind swallowed the sound of pursuit. Only then did he slow, the girl limp in his arms again. Her breathing was steady for now, but he knew the hunters wouldn't stop. And the next time they found them, it would be even harder to escape. The storm eased just enough for Ethan to catch his breath. He lowered himself behind a jagged rock formation, letting the wind mask their shapes. The alien girl lay in his arms, her silver eyes half open. Her breathing was steady now, not as shallow as before. But her face was pale and her body still weak. He set her down gently on the sand. Kneeling beside her for a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the whistling wind weaving through the rocks. Finally, she turned her head slightly, her voice a soft whisper. The words were in her language. But then, slowly, she began to speak in broken human speech. "My name." "Serena," she said. Her accent was heavy, the syllables careful. Ethan leaned closer. Trying to catch every word, she paused, then touched her chest weakly. "I, Carrie." "Key," he frowned. "Key." "What kind of key?" She swallowed hard, closing her eyes as if gathering strength. "Not metal key," she whispered, "inside me. Code, my people's shield. They want it to open. Kill." The meaning hit him hard. She wasn't just running for her life. She was carrying something that could destroy her entire world if it fell into the wrong hands. Ethan sat back, the weight of her words pressing on him. He had only wanted to save a dying stranger, But now he realized he had stepped into something far bigger. Serena's hand reached toward his arm, her fingers curling against his sleeve. "You could leave me," she said softly. "You should. But you didn't." Her gaze was steady now, even though her voice was weak. "Why?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment. The answer was simple, but not easy to say, "Because I know what it's like to be left behind," he said quietly. His mind flicked to old memories. He tried not to think about faces he had lost. The times he had been abandoned in the wasteland with no one coming to help. Her eyes softened, but before either of them could speak again, a distant thud rolled through the sand. Ethan turned sharply, scanning the horizon through the fading wall of the storm. Faint dark shapes moved to steady to be rocks, too large to be drones, ground troops, pushing through the desert toward their location. He stood, helping Serena to her feet. She swayed, but her legs managed to hold her weight for the first time since he found her. "We have to keep moving," he said. She nodded once, determination flickering in her expression despite the exhaustion. They moved quickly, keeping low behind the rocks. Ethan's eyes never stopped scanning the skies and the sand for movement. The storm had done its job hiding them for a while, but it wouldn't last. Serena's pace slowed with each step, and Ethan could tell she was still far from strong. As they reached the edge of a ridge, Ethan spotted a faint metallic glint in the distance. It was the remains of an old transport ship. Half buried in the sand, the hull was cracked and scorched. But part of it was still intact. "Shelter," he said, pointing. Serena followed him down the slope toward it. Inside, the air was stale and dry. The walls creaked with the wind, and sand had piled in the corners. Ethan checked the space quickly. Finding it empty except for a few rusted crates, Serena sat against the wall, her chest rising and falling quickly from the effort. Ethan crouched in front of her. "If what you say is true, they won't stop," he said. "You're not just some fugitive there after something that could win a war." Serena's eyes met his. "Yes, and they will kill you too. If you stay." He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I've already stayed," he said. "That's not going to change now." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but close. She reached into the small pouch tied to her waist, pulling out a thin shard of crystal that glowed faintly. She held it out to him. "If I die, give to rebels. Only them." Ethan didn't move to take it. "You're not going to die," he said firmly. She studied him for a moment, then slowly tucked the crystal back into the pouch. Her eyes closed, as if she trusted him. Just a little more. The sound of crunching sand outside shattered the moment. Ethan moved to the narrow opening of the hull, peeking out. 3 figures in dark armor were approaching slowly. Weapons raised, their visors glowed red in the fading light. Ethan turned back to Serena. "Can you move?" She nodded, though her body trembled. He helped her up, gripping his mining rod with his free hand. The first armored figure stepped through the opening, and Ethan swung hard, the rod slamming into their shoulder plate with a metallic crack. The soldier staggered back, but the others were already moving in. Serena pressed herself against the wall, her hand glowing faintly again. She sent out a quick pulse of silver light that blinded one of the soldiers long enough for Ethan to hit him hard. The third lunged, knocking Ethan to the ground. The rod clattered away, and the soldier's weapon came down toward his chest before the strike could land. Serena's glow flared brighter, a sharp wave of light knocking the soldier back. Ethan scrambled to his feet, grabbing her hand. They ran out through the far side of the wreck, the storm swallowing them again. The sound of shouts followed, but the wind carried it away. Ethan didn't slow until they were far from the wreck. Serena leaning heavily against him, her eyes closed. Again, but her breathing stayed steady. He knew now there was no turning back. Whatever this fight was, it had become his too, and he would see it through to the end. The storm had almost passed. leaving the wasteland quiet in a way that felt wrong. Ethan knew the silence didn't mean safety. It meant the hunters were close and moving carefully now. Serena leaned against him as they walked, her steps slow but steady. Her face was pale. Yet there was a sharpness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The air felt heavy, pressing down on them. Ethan kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see red visor lights at any moment. The wind carried faint sounds, metal scraping, low voices distorted by helmets. The enemy was somewhere nearby, closing the distance without rushing, confident they would find their prey. They reached a stretch of cracked earth where the ground dipped into a shallow basin. In the center was the skeleton of a massive machine, half buried in sand, its twisted frame pointing toward the sky like the ribs of a dead beast. Ethan guided Serena inside, using the jagged metal as cover. She sank down against one of the curved supports. Breathing hard, he crouched in front of her. Scanning the horizon, "They'll be here soon," he said quietly. "If they surround us, we won't make it." Serena's gaze didn't waver. Then, "We break the circle." Her words stayed with him. He had been running since the moment he found her, always reacting, never taking control. Maybe she was right. Maybe waiting to be trapped was the worst thing he could do. He looked at the rusted wreck around them, the metal jagged but still strong in places. It gave him an idea. He helped Serena to her feet and guided her deeper into the wreck. Where shadows were thicker and the sand muffled their steps, he found a section of the frame that had come loose but was still attached by a hinge of corroded bolts. With enough force, it could fall like a gate, blocking the path. As he worked, Serena watched him closely. "You fight." "Not for me," she said softly. "Why then?" He didn't answer right away, his hands busy loosening the bolts. Finally, he said, "Because no one else will." Her expression softened, and for a moment she looked as if she wanted to say more, but the sound of approaching boots cut her off. The glow of red visors flickered through the gaps in the wreck, moving like hunting animals. Ethan motioned for her to stay low. His grip tightened on the mining rod as the first shadow moved into view. The soldier stepped through the gap, weapon raised. Ethan swung hard, catching them across the side of the helmet. The figure went down, armor clanging against the metal floor. Another soldier moved in fast, firing a short burst. The blasts hit the wreck's frame, sending sparks raining down. Serena raised her hand, silver light sparking from her fingers. The soldier staggered but didn't fall. Ethan rushed forward, slamming the rod into their chest plate and knocking them back through the gap. The moment the space cleared, he shoved the loose section of frame down. The metal screeched as it fell, slamming into place and sealing the path. The sound echoed across the basin, and Ethan knew it would draw more of them, but at least for now, one side was blocked. Heavy footsteps pounded against the sand outside. The hunters were regrouping. Trying to find another way in, Ethan turned to Serena. "We're going to have to fight our way out." She shook her head faintly. "No. I can clear a way, but it will hurt." Before he could ask what she meant, her glow intensified, the silver light spreading across her skin like liquid fire. The air in the wreck shimmered with heat. Ethan stepped back, shielding his eyes. A wave of energy exploded outward, tearing through the gaps in the wreck and slamming into the hunters outside. Their shouts turned into sharp cries, followed by the sound of bodies hitting the sand. When the light faded, Serena collapsed to her knees, breathing hard. Ethan was beside her in an instant. "Hey, stay with me." She managed a faint smile. "Path is open." Her voice was weak, but there was pride in it. He lifted her again and moved quickly through the wreck's far side. The air outside smelled faintly of scorched metal and burnt sand. A few armored figures lay scattered, their armor cracked or smoking. Ethan didn't stop to check if they were alive. He kept running. his boots kicking up dust as he headed toward the darker shape of a ridge in the distance. Behind them, the hunters regrouped faster than he expected. The sound of engines roared to life, heavier than the drones. Ethan glanced back and saw a vehicle cresting the far edge of the basin. Its turret already swinging toward them, he veered, sharply cutting across the ridge's slope to avoid the line of fire. The first blast hit the sand just behind them, sending a shockwave that nearly knocked him off his feet. Serena clung to him, her breath warm against his neck. He could feel her pulsate was too fast. She wasn't going to last much longer without proper help. At the base of the ridge, Ethan spotted a dark opening, almost invisible against the rock. It looked like the mouth of a cave. He darted inside. The sound of engines muffled by the stone walls, the cave sloped downward, cool air wrapping around them. Only when the light from outside had faded completely did he stop. Serena's head rested against his shoulder, her eyes half closed. "You keep running," she whispered. "Even when you're tired." He nodded, his voice low. "I'll stop when you're safe." But as he looked into the dark ahead, he knew that safety was still far away. And the hunters would not stop until one of them was dead. The cave was dark and silent, except for the sound of Ethan's footsteps and Serena's uneven breathing. The walls narrowed as he moved deeper, forcing him to turn sideways in places. The air grew colder, but it carried a faint metallic taste. Somewhere ahead, water dripped steadily. Echoing through the stone, he stopped when the tunnel opened into a hidden chamber. Faint blue light shimmering from crystals embedded in the walls. The glow made Serena's skin look almost whole again. But he knew it was only an illusion. She was still weak, her pulse too fast, her breaths too shallow. He set her down gently on a flat rock near the wall. Kneeling beside her, "We can rest for a moment," he said. Though in his gut he knew they didn't have that luxury. Serena's eyes opened just enough to find his face. "They are coming," she whispered. Her voice was so soft it almost blended with the dripping water. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had been in fights before, but never one where the enemy had so many resources, so much reach. Every step since he found her had been a retreat, and there was nowhere left to run. The narrow tunnels meant only 1 or 2 hunters could come through at a time, which gave him an idea. He stood and began moving rocks from the edges of the chamber, stacking them in a rough barricade near the tunnel entrance. Serena watched him without speaking, her silver eyes following his every movement. Finally, she said, "If they take me, they win. You must not let them. I'm not letting them take you." He replied, his voice firm. He found an old piece of metal lodged in the cave floor and used it to reinforce the barricade. His mining rod leaned within arm's reach. Minutes passed before the sound came, faint, at first a distant thud. The scrape of boots against stone, the low hum of powered armor. Ethan's pulse quickened. Serena closed her eyes, her lips moving silently as if saying a prayer in her own language. The first visor light appeared in the tunnel, glowing red against the darkness. Ethan gripped the mining rod and waited until the soldier was halfway through. Then he swung, the iron connecting with the side of the helmet in a sharp, ringing blow. The figure stumbled, crashing into the barricade. Ethan shoved hard, sending them back into the narrow tunnel. A second came right after, firing blindly into the chamber. Sparks flew as energy blasts hit the crystal walls. Ethan ducked behind a boulder, waiting for the pause between shots before lunging forward and slamming the rod into the weapon. The soldier tried to counter, but the narrow space worked against them. Another hit to the visor, and they fell back. The tunnel filled with the sound of shouted orders. Ethan knew they would try again. More aggressively this time, he glanced at Serena. Her glow had grown faint again. Her fingers moved toward the pouch at her waist, pulling out the crystal shard she had shown him before. She held it out, her hand trembling. "If I die?" "Take it. You're not dying," he said sharply, refusing to take it. Her gaze softened in a way that cut through him. "Ethan, you already gave me more time than I had," she whispered. "If I don't survive, you must make sure." "They don't use it." Before he could answer, the next wave came. 3 soldiers forcing themselves through the tunnel. Ethan swung hard, knocking the first to the ground. The second fired at close range, the heat searing past his shoulder. He pushed forward, using his weight to slam them against the wall. The third tried to grab Serena, but she raised her hand weakly. A flicker of silver light stunning them just long enough for Ethan to bring the rod down in a final strike. The chamber stank of scorched armor and dust, but the fight wasn't over. More sounds echoed from deeper in the tunnel, heavier than before. Ethan's chest rose and fell rapidly. He was running out of strength, but he couldn't let it show. Serena's life was still in his hands. Then, from the far end of the tunnel, a different sound came, a deep, rising hum that wasn't from the hunters. Ethan turned sharply. His mind raced through possibilities. A moment later, a burst of bright white light filled the chamber, and a sleek craft descended into the opening above. Hovering in place, a voice echoed from a loudspeaker, speaking in Serena's language. Urgent and commanding, her eyes widened, and for the first time since he found her, hope lit her face. "Rebels," she breathed. The craft's side hatch opened, a ramp lowering into the chamber. Several figures in lighter armor rushed in, their weapons trained on the tunnel. One of them approached Ethan, speaking in quick human words. "We'll take her. She's safe now." Ethan hesitated. Looking at Serena, she gave a small nod, her fingers brushing his hand. "You saved me," she said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. He helped lift her onto the craft, the rebel securing her quickly. The lead soldier turned back to him. "You should come with us. They'll come for you now, too." Ethan looked once more at the dark tunnel, then at the frail but determined girl who had somehow changed everything for him. He stepped onto the ramp, and the craft began to rise, the cave and the wasteland shrinking below. Serena's hand found his, her grip weak but sure. "Home," she whispered. He didn't know if she meant hers or something else, but for the first time in years, he thought maybe it could mean his too.